Work?
My name is Hayden Duran.
And Mr. Duran, what do you do for a living?
I'm the Director of Information Technology Systems at Fairview General Hospital, basically the IT guy.
Mr. Duran, why are you here today?
I'm here because Andy thinks that my son Jesse intentionally killed her daughter, Sydney.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Can you elaborate a little more on that?
And what Mr. Duran thinks about how the white he's here today.
This park is charged Mr. Duran with intentional shooting, correct?
Yes.
I think the witness can go into that then. I attempt to rebut those accusations, but since you've actually charged him, specifically this park has charged him for the intentional shooting death of her daughter, I do think the witness can state this.
Mr. Duran, why are you here today?
Because Andy thinks that my Jesse, my son, intentionally shot her daughter.
Mr. Duran, you just mentioned Mrs. Park. Could you tell the jury a little bit about your relationship with her?
We were best friends. She was at the hospital the day that my son Jesse was born. We kept in contact after that day, and even to this day, I still consider Andy my friend.
Can you tell the court a little bit about the relationship that Jesse and Sydney had?
They were like brother and sister. We couldn't keep them apart. Andy and I actually had to pull money out of our own pockets to put a gate on the fence in the backyard so the kids could run back and forth. They spent all their time together, whether it was watching movies or playing video games. There was one time where I got a couple days off, so we went down to an amusement park called Rocket World in Park City. Just the kids loved playing together, and it was a beautiful thing to see.
Mr. Duran, other than the issue that's brought us here in court today, did you have any issues with Parks?
I don't want to use the word issue because I mean, like I said, I still respect Andy a lot, even if she thinks that Jesse would kill Sydney. But there were two occasions where I really had to question Andy's judgment. And to this day, I still don't understand why she made the decisions that she made.
Let's take those one at a time. Tell the jury a little bit about the first one.
That summer, I'd been working long hours at work. We were implementing a new system at the hospital, so I wasn't at home as often. Andy let me leave Jesse with her babysitter. On August 17th, 2010, when I went to pick Jesse up, I found out that the kids knew about a gun.
Did you know about it?
Andy had told me in January 2010 that their home had been robbed and that they bought a gun because they wanted to feel safe. And I respected that option. But I respected that, and I respected her for telling me.
So how did you feel when you found out that Jesse knew about the gun too?
I was concerned that apparently Jesse had been discussing a gun with Sydney, and for two smart 11-year-old children to know that there's a gun in a house, that's just asking for an accident to happen.
Now, Mr. Duran, I'd like to talk to you about the second incident, or the second concern that you had. Tell the jury a little bit about that.
It was the next morning on August 18th. I went to drop Jesse off at the Parks home, and I found how Andy pulled me aside and let me know that the babysitter called in sick and that she was going to leave two children home alone without supervision.
Who was going to be watching over the children then?
There was going to be nobody present throughout the day, but there was a neighbor who was going to stop by every couple of hours to make sure that they were still all right. I think his name was Keith Dunlop.
How well did you know Keith Dunlop?
To be honest, not that well at all. He was an older gentleman who lived across the street from the Parks. He'd be watering his grass in the morning and to check the mail, but he never said anything other than hi.
What did you do about the situation, if anything?
I was caught between a rock and a hard place. There wasn't a whole lot that I could do. I'd really been depending on Andy that summer. His last minute change, ultimately I decided to trust Andy because she assured me that he had done this before with Jess Sydney, and that the children would be okay, but at the same time, just, I wish that there could have been something else. I wish that there had been another way because of what happened.
What do you mean by that, Mr. Duran?
I was pulling into the parking lot at work when my son called me. He was really upset. He said, "Dad, I need you. Come home now."
What happened after that?
I'd never heard my son sound like that, so naturally I just whipped out of the parking lot and went back. And then along the way the police called me and said the exact same thing. Something had happened, I needed to come back. And it was a nightmare when I arrived.
What did you see when you arrived back at the Parks home?
There were police cars and there were ambulances and people everywhere outside the Parks home. My mind just went to the worst, so I ran to the front door to see if I could find my Jesse. I had questions that I needed answered. I wanted to find out where my son was and find out if he was okay.
What did you see once you got inside the Parks home?
I remember looking to my left towards the living room area, and there was a white sheet, a small body underneath that sheet. And I just broke down screaming. The cops dragged me into another room, and my son was standing there.
What happened once you got to Jesse?
He just looked shocked. He was standing there, there were bags on his hands, and there were police officers everywhere. He wasn't talking to anybody, nobody was looking at him. He just, even though there was a room full of people, he looked alone. And I wanted to run to him and hug him and hold him and tell him that everything was going to be okay. But the cops held me back and said I couldn't contaminate their suspect.
Suspect for what, Mr. Duran?
I realized that because Jesse was standing there, it wasn't Jesse underneath the white sheet. I didn't see Sydney anywhere. So it became clear that Sydney's body was the one underneath the white sheet, and there were bags over my son's hands, and the cops were surrounding him, so it looked like they were trying to say that he was the one who did this to Sydney. And that just doesn't make sense.
Why didn't that make sense, Mr. Duran?
For anybody who knew Jesse and Sydney, knew that these two kids were best friends. They spent all of their time together.
Improper character evidence.
Can you explain a little more, counsel?
To how big the bags were and everything like that, and what was going on around Jesse.
Your Honor, this is not improper character evidence. We are simply going into what Mr. Duran saw and his impression of the Parks home and the events that happened in the Parks home after he arrived there on the morning of August 18th. I'm not sure.
Can I have a moment, please?
Yes, please.
This one is trying to show that because Jesse acted in a way prior to August 18th, that he's going to act in a way on the actual date of August 18th.
And how did he act prior to August 18th?
With Jesse and Sydney's friendship of how they acted together and what happened on August 18th.
Your response?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Duran is simply trying to show the relationship that Jesse and Sydney shared as they were best friends, and it is important for us to know why Mr. Duran feels that it does or does not make sense, because he is the defendant in Sydney's case, and he is being held liable, or he is being accused of being held liable for the actions of the events of August 18, 2010.
Plaintiff, your response?
Can I have a moment, please?
Yes.
So what they're trying to say is that how Jesse acted with Sydney is like an improper characterization. Sorry, I can't say the word. Characterization. So Jesse's how the prior events with Sydney and how they interacted does not influence how they would act on August 18th.
Counselor, it seems like you're saying that because Jesse and Sydney were friends, and because they associated peacefully in the past, that it'd be more likely that or less likely rather that Jesse would shoot Sydney. How would you respond to this, or the accusation that this is improper here?
Your Honor, if I may proffer, Mr. Duran will not be going into any specific reasons as to why Jesse would or would not have shot Sydney based on the relationship. He will only be testifying as to the relationship specifically that Jesse and Sydney shared.
Well, how is that relationship pertinent or relevant if it's not improper character? It's not showing that because Jesse and Sydney were friends in the past, that it's less likely that Jesse would shoot Sydney.
Your Honor, it's simply just going to show the relationship that Sydney and Jesse shared, and Jesse's lack of intent to harm Sydney.
As long as it pertains to lack of intent, you are free to go into that. That being said, for now, counsel's objection is sustained. You're free to rephrase and deal specifically with Jesse's lack of intent.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Duran, how did you feel about Jesse being a suspect for Sydney's death?
It just didn't make sense to me that Jesse and Sydney had been the best of friends, and it just didn't, like, I still can't wrap my mind around somebody thinking that an 11-year-old would shoot their best friend. I don't see where somebody would think that my son would do that or why he would want to.
Mr. Duran, how did you feel about Jesse being a suspect after no one else was there on August 18, 2010 other than Sydney and Jesse?
That's what made it even worse. Andy thinks that my son is the reason why Sydney is dead, thinking that he intentionally shot Sydney, that he tried to kill her on purpose, but none of this would have happened if the gun had been kept better or somebody had been there.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. You may.
Jesse had a fascination with guns, correct?
He had a fascination with the military. His great-grandfather had served in World War II and wanted to be just like him.
And Jesse also wanted more realistic war games, right?
Yes, he often talked about how he wanted to be just like his grandfather, and Jesse and I spent a lot of time bonding over these games that simulated the types of things that his great-grandfather had done.
Jesse was also allowed to play first-person shooter games at the mere age of 10.
Yes, Jesse and I played them together. Like I said, they mirrored things about the military. They taught values such as courage and justice and camaraderie. And I thought that was a beautiful message for my son.
But these video games portrayed shooting people.
Yes, while killing is not necessarily a message that I was trying to portray, it was more the unity in fighting for a good cause and quenching evil and things of that nature that I thought were absolutely important to discuss with my son and a great way for us to spend time together.
And these video games also show Jesse on how to shoot a gun, right?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, no.
But when you play the game, it shows you how to shoot a person through a gun.
Objection, Your Honor, improper character evidence.
How's that?
Opposing counsel is going to use the fact that Jesse played these games and that he was able to shoot virtual characters using a controller to show that he acted in a similar way on the morning of August 18th, 2010, and that he was able to and knew how to shoot Sydney.
This is going to Jesse's intent on August 18th.
I'm inclined to agree with plaintiff counsel. I do think they have some latitude to talk about Jesse's knowledge and intent, and I think that to this extent it does go to support that, so overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. So these video games show Jesse how to shoot a gun, right?
I actually disagree with that statement completely.
But on the video game, it showed the person behind the controller using the gun and the gun pointing at a person, right?
Well, I suppose so, but I think that there's a major difference between pressing a button on a game controller and being able to pick up a real gun and know how to use it. They're not the same thing.
But it still, in a way, showed Jesse how to shoot someone.
I mean, it showed Jesse what happens when a bullet is ejected from a gun, but I don't think that because my son played video games that he knew how to kill somebody. I really don't.
You were also aware of Jesse's disruptive behavior in different settings, right?
I'm not sure that I understand what you're talking about.
The student disciplinary notification, you're aware of that, right?
Yes, I did receive that notice.
And would you be able to recognize it if I showed you it?
Yes, I would.
You may.
Let's
Please show
imagine-
the document to opposing
Yeah.
counsel first.
For the record reflect, I'm showing witness, was then previously marked as exhibit 9. What is this exactly, Mr. Duran?
It's a notification of student discipline that Jesse's school sent me back in 2010 in April.
And it shows Jesse using disruptive, kind of aggressive behavior towards other students.
Objection,
right?
Your Honor. If opposing counsel is going to go into specifics about this document, then I would request that she enter into evidence first.
Can we enter this document
Yes.
before you go further? Please do so.
And, Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to object to hearsay.
Can I see a copy of this document before you?
Sure.
Thank you. Now you're objecting to hearsay to this document?
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little more, please?
Yes, Your Honor. This document was not written by Hayden Duran, and this document is an out-of-court statement being used for the truth of the matter asserted.
Respond?
Can I have a moment?
Yes, you can.
This document is going to the motive of Jesse and how it could reflect on August 18th, Jesse's actions on this day.
How does this document go to Jesse's motive to kill Sydney Moore?
It shows you how he was using aggressive and, in my terms, violent behavior towards other kids and wanted them to fall down and die.
Then how would you address counsel's objection, not improper character evidence, but to hearsay? Yes, you may.
Under Rule 803, the exceptions to against hearsay, the existing mental, emotional, physical conditions, the statement of the declarant's existing state of mind.
And how would that pertain to this document?
Because Jesse using aggressive behavior and wanting people to fall down and die, and that goes towards how it was on August 18th.
Counsel's response?
Yes, Your Honor, this statement is still an out-of-court statement being used for the truth of the matter asserted, and as far as opposing counsel's response to the hearsay objection specifically, this does not show any specific state of mind of Jesse Duran, and,
Why does this not go to Jesse's specific state of mind?
these are actions that Jesse made in a specific instance, and I would also like to further, add to my objection improper character evidence, because opposing counsel will be using these specific instances of Jesse Duran's conduct to show that he acted in a similar way on August 18, 2010.
Response?
The second objection, it's going to the motive of how Jesse acted on August 18th. And then to the first objection, under the Rule 803, 6A, the record was made at or near the time by or from information transmitted by someone with knowledge.
Are you referring to 8036?
Yes. 806A.
If I may respond, Your Honor,
Please do.
8036A is a record of regularly conducted activity. This notice of school discipline is not a regularly conducted activity by Hayden Duran.
As this statement was not, or as this was not created by Jesse Duran, I don't think this falls under Jesse Duran's state of mind. Regarding improper character evidence, I do think, or excuse me, rather, counsel has outlaid a second hearsay deception. I do think counsel is free to go into that rather than existing state of mind for the public, or excuse me, rather regularly conducted record. That being said, I don't think we've laid any foundation that this was the product of a regularly conducted activity, and that this actually is a reliable copy of that. So I think we need to hear some foundation before we proceed with 8036.
This is the third suspension of Jesse, correct?
Yes, that was the case.
And so with that, Jesse was acting in a way that was disruptive, right?
The teachers alleged that he was acting in a way that was disruptive, but when I talked to my son, he denied most of these things happening.
But this wasn't the first time that Jesse acted disruptive, correct?
This wasn't the first time that the teachers had sent him home from school. He had some trouble with some of the other kids. They made fun of him a lot. He and I had a lot of talks about how to deal with that properly.
Another sign of Jesse's disruptive behavior was the picture of me and my gun, correct?
I actually disagree. I don't think that was disruptive at all.
That was my apologies, that was a warning sign of Jesse's behavior, correct?
Again, I don't think that warned me of anything.
He was showing loving his gun, right?
Yes.
And you don't take that, that's not a sign of having, sorry, apologies. And you don't see that as a concern of Jesse?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, I would ask that if opposing counsel is going to go into another specific document, that she first familiarize Mr. Duran with that document and then enter it into evidence before she goes into the specific contents of that document, which is pertinent to today's case.
I do think we need to establish a little foundation that the witness knows the document, and then specifically that we have to have the document entered into evidence before we start talking about it. Does counsel have a copy of that document? Let's enter it before we talk about it further. Yes, please. You may.
Let the record, yes, thank you. Let the record reflect on the witness.
Correct. So also response. Yes, please.
Jesse made this, correct?
Yes.
And it depicts Jesse loving.
Objection, Your Honor. This document has not been entered into evidence yet.
I think counsel is trying to establish that this document was made by Jesse Duran and Hayden was familiar with it. That being said, before counsel goes too much further into what's actually contained, let's enter into documents. Are you attending evidence?
Yes.
Any objections to this exhibit, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. I don't believe that opposing counsel has laid enough foundation as to enter this document into evidence, and
How so?
she has not familiarized Hayden Duran with this document specifically. She simply just went straight into the contents of the document. So.
Are you contesting whether or not Hayden's actually familiar with this document?
No, Your Honor. don't think that opposing counsel laid enough foundation as to enter this documented evidence.
Can you just quickly establish that Peggy Duran found this drawing?
Jesse Duran made this, correct?
Yes.
And you were aware of Jesse making this picture, correct?
Yes, I found it.
Let the record reflect everything. No, may I approve?
Any objections to this time?
Yes, Your Honor, at this time I'd like to object to improper character evidence.
You may be heard on that time.
Yes, Your Honor. If I may proffer, opposing counsel is going to use this document to show that because Jesse Duran drew stick figures of a gun, stick figures holding a gun, pointing it at another stick figure, that he acted in a similar way on August 18th and pointed a gun at Sydney Duran. Sydney Park.
I'm going to show that Jesse knew that the importance of gun and that guns were dangerous, and that's what I'm going towards.
In that case, since counsel's outlined knowledge per 404B, I think this is admissible. It is not improper character evidence, so we'll admit this exhibit evidence. Feel free to redirect on the circumstances upon which this drawing was made.
Yes, Your Honor.
Were you concerned about Jesse's picture?
I was not.
It shows Jesse loving a gun. That did not concern you?
No, like I said before, my son was fascinated with the military and with military weaponry. This was one of his passions. He had read books on it. He had done a lot of research into all this sort of thing. So I was not concerned with the fact that he drew a picture saying that he loved his gun because it was his passion.
This is still showing that Jesse loved to shoot at the bad kids, correct?
No, it actually doesn't show him shooting at a bad kid at all. It says, this is me and my gun scaring all the bad kids away, but it doesn't show him shooting anybody. And, I mean, to be fair, these are stick figures, it's not a real person.
But Jesse's still trying to scare away the bad kids, correct?
That's what the picture says, but that doesn't mean that that's what is actually the case.
Besides these two things, you were also warned by Danny Brooks, the babysitter, of Jesse's fascination with guns, right?
Danny Brooks used to come to complain to me all the time about Jesse's behavior. And I took it with a grain of salt, as every parent should, but I sometimes felt like Danny Brooks resented me. And because she resented me, treated my son unfairly.
Danny also made you aware that the Parks had a gun in their home, right?
I had already been made aware of that before Danny Brooks told me.
And Danny made you aware that Jesse knew that there was a gun in the house, right?
Yes, she said that Jesse and Sydney had both been discussing it.
And Jesse stated to you on August 17th that he wanted to hold a real gun, right?
He said that. We sat down and talked about gun safety and the importance of being safe with a gun.
And when you warned Jesse about the importance of gun safety, you just kind of shrugged it off, right?
It appeared that way, but we had this conversation many times before.
And on August 18th, you left Jesse home alone with Sydney at the Parks house, correct?
When I left the Parks home on August 18th, Jesse and Sydney were in Andy Parks' care. After that, Andy left.
You knew that the children were going to be left home alone, correct?
I did know that, but at the time, I trusted Andy's judgment, and unfortunately, I didn't.
And you knew that they were going to be left home alone with a gun in the house, right?
Yes, as did Andy.
And you thought it was a bad idea to leave Jesse and Sydney home alone, right?
I was very uncomfortable with the situation, but again, Andy was so sure that it was going to be okay, and I trusted her judgment.
You were afraid to leave Jesse home alone with a gun in the house, right?
I'm afraid to leave any child home alone with a gun.
No further questions.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. We just ask that the witness be allowed to step down.
Mr. Duran, you may retake your seat. Anyone like this exhibit? Call your next witness.
The principal is Jesse Duran to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name's Jesse Duran.
And Jesse, how old are you today?
I'm 15.
Right, and today we're going to talk about some things that may be difficult for you. If you ever need to take a second, just look at your dad and look at me. but direct all your answers to the bench, alright?
Okay.
Alright, why do you think you're here today, Jesse?
I think I'm here because Mrs. Park, she thinks I killed Sydney.
And how do you know the Parks?
Well, Sydney is my best friend and she's my neighbor. And Mrs. Park is Sydney's mom, so I'd see her a lot.
You just mentioned you had a relationship with Sydney. Can you tell the court about what your relationship was like?
Yeah, we were best friends. We were always playing at each other's houses. We played outside and inside, and she hung out with me at school. And she was pretty much like my only friend besides my dad.
And Jesse, I'd like to direct your attention now to August 17th, 2010. Do you remember that day?
Yeah.
And where did you spend that day?
I spent it at the Park's house, Sydney's house.
And who else was there on the 17th?
Sydney was there, and Danny was there.
And did anything happen that day that would be pertinent to why we're here today?
Well, Sydney told me that her mom had a gun.
And what happened after you found that out?
After, my dad came, and he was talking to Danny for a while, and he went home.
And after you went home, what did you and your dad do?
Well, I told my dad that Sydney had told me that they had a gun, and
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Response, Your Honor. Any of Sydney's statements are an exclusion from hearsay as they are an admission by party opponent.
Your Honor, I'm not objecting to Sydney's statements, but to Jesse Duran's statements, as they are made out of court and have not been entered into record.
What exactly was the specific statement?
I was actually about to ask which statement you're referring to.
The witness has started to say what he told Sydney, and that would constitute hearsay because his statements were made on August 17, 2010, and not in court today.
Alright, let's hear the statement first, and if this is hearsay, feel free to re-object, okay? Let's just get into the statement before we go any further.
Jesse, continue telling us what you and your dad were discussing.
well, after I told him that I found out that the Parks had a gun, he told me, he tells me a lot that guns are dangerous and stuff, so he went on and he told me about that they weren't toys and everything. He told me that a lot.
And how was your relationship with your father, Jesse?
We're really close. He's kind of a nerd, but he's cool.
I'd like to move ahead and talk about August 18th. Do you remember that day?
Yes, very well.
How did that day begin for you, Jesse?
Well, I woke up pretty early that day. It was summer break, and school was about to start, so Dad was telling me I had to start waking up earlier for my classes. And then I went to Sydney's house.
And when you got to Sydney's, who all was there?
Sydney was there, and then Mrs. Park was there.
And what happened after you were there?
Well, first I went and I woke up Sydney, and then we started playing, and then Mrs. Park left.
And when Mrs. Park left, what did you and Sydney do?
Well, we went to go get out the Park's gun.
And how did you guys get access to the gun?
Well, first Sydney and I, we went into the room with the code, and then we got the code, and then we went into the room with the safe, and then she read the numbers, and I typed them in the thing, and then we took out the gun.
Was there anything else in the box or the safe?
Yeah, when we opened the safe, there was the gun, and then there was a box of bullets with it too.
Did you or Sydney load the gun that day?
We both did.
And after you loaded the gun, what did you and Sydney proceed to do with the gun?
Well, we were just pointing it at stuff. We both had played games and stuff, so I pointed it at the mirror and pretended I was a Navy SEAL, and then she was pointing it at like the vase and stuff, and then she pointed it at me, and I told her that wasn't funny.
And after Sydney pointed the gun at you, what did you and Sydney do?
Well, we kind of got bored pretty quickly playing with the gun. I mean, and so we just went to go watch some TV. But Sydney wanted to watch this show I didn't like.
And what happened?
Well, when we went to the room and we sat down, I told her I didn't like the show, but she didn't want to change it. And I was like, well, let me just see the gun, because I figured, I could just play with it or something. And then she tossed it to me.
And Jesse, I know this might be hard, but I need you to tell the court what happened when Sydney tossed you that gun.
I tried to catch it because I didn't want it to fall. And when I tried to catch it, it went off when I caught it. And it shot.
And who did it shoot, Jesse?
Sydney.
I'd like to move forward and talk about after that incident. Did you talk with anyone about what happened that day?
Well, I kind of was panicking really bad after, and I called my dad, and I told him to come home because Sydney was hurt.
And Jesse, did you talk to any police officers that day?
I only remember talking to one, but I don't really remember what we talked about.
Did you make a statement?
Yeah, I wrote a thing down for the cop.
Would you recognize that if I showed it to you today?
Yeah.
Let the record reflect I'm approaching opposing counsel with what has been previously marked as a grant. Would your honors like a courtesy copy?
Not at this moment.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Jesse, what have I handed you?
This is the thing I wrote for the cop.
And is it the same as when you wrote it that day?
It looks like it. It's my handwriting.
And hasn't been altered in any way?
I don't think so.
At this time, defense offers Exhibit A into evidence.
Any objections to defense A?
Yes, Your Honor, I object as to hearsay.
All right, what's your response to hearsay?
Your Honor, this is his statements that he wrote down and has just confirmed are the reflection of how they were that day, and so therefore they are not hearsay.
So you're arguing that because they're Jesse Duran's statements, they can't constitute hearsay?
No, because he's confirmed them and that it would be an admission by a party opponent as well, if for their objection.
So these statements would constitute an admission by a party opponent?
Yes,
Counselor, who's called Jesse Duran?
we did, Your Honor.
And how would these be
Would
an
not be.
admission by a party? Counselor, what's your response?
May I have a moment to?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, 8033 would say that a statement of then existing mental condition would be an exception to hearsay.
Any response?
Your Honor, this is still hearsay because even though it was Jesse Duran's statement, he did write it out of court. And as to 803, what was the rule?
8033.
I have a moment to confirm.
Absolutely.
Your Honor, I would argue that this does not fall under the exception of then existing mental, emotional, physical condition because this statement was not written immediately after the events on August 18th, 2010. The council has not established at what time this document was written, therefore it does not fall under this exception, and it is still an out-of-court statement, even though Jesse Duran did write it himself.
Your response?
Your Honor, 8033 is not a present sense impression, which I feel as though opposing counsel argued against. It is a then existing mental condition, and it's still an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033. I do not believe my exception has been responded to.
Counselor seems to be arguing that even though this wasn't made at the incident or immediately after their word, it's still Jesse Durant's then existing state of mind. How would you respond to that?
Your Honor, in order for that to be a then existing state of mind, I do think that the statement had to have been written immediately or like immediately after the incident on August 18, 2010. This is not a then existing state of mind because that time had passed between the morning when Jesse shot Sydney and the time when he wrote the statement.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You're feel free to cross on when the statement was written. However, even though this statement wasn't written during the incident or immediately thereafter, I still think it reflects Jesse Durant's then existing state of mind. So feel free to cross on when this was written, however, overruled.
Does that mean it is offered in evidence?
It is as a defense aid.
Yes. Would Your Honors like a copy now?
Yes, please.
Now, Jesse, is everything you wrote in the statement true?
No.
And is there anything that isn't true?
Yeah, well, I said that I made Sydney tell me the combination to the safe, but that's not true. We both went to get the combination together and open the safe together, and then I say that Sydney didn't want to get the gun out and stuff, but I mean, she was the one who told me about it in the first place. She wanted to. So, but everything else is pretty much true. Yeah.
And Jesse, who was there when Sydney threw you the gun and it went off?
It was just Sydney and I that were there. No one else was there. I wish they had.
I passed the list. May I retrieve?
You may. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I proceed, may I ask my timekeepers how much time it is?
Absolutely.
I just have to-
You may proceed.
Jesse, I would like to ask you a couple of questions regarding August 18, 2010. And if it might be hard for you, please take a moment. You were interested in guns, correct?
I mean, yeah, I was about as interested in guns as I was with like soccer and Harry Potter when I was 11.
And but you did have an avid interest in them, and you did research about guns, correct?
But I have just as much of an interest in guns as I did in soccer and Batman and Harry Potter. I liked all of them. And then I researched all kinds of stuff. Like
You mentioned you got a phone sometime before August 18th, correct?
yeah, I think it was like around a week or so before August.
And you spent that week researching about guns, correct?
I don't remember that.
Jesse, you did search on the difference between a gun, correct, and a revolver?
I don't remember that.
You do know what a gun is, correct?
I know what a gun is, yeah.
And you do know what a revolver is, correct?
Yeah.
And you would agree with me that a revolver is a gun that you put the cartridges into the barrel and it spins, and that's how you shoot a revolver, correct?
Yeah.
And you knew this when you were 11 years old, correct?
I knew what a gun was. I didn't know like specifically what a revolver was, but
Jesse, are you saying that you did not know what a revolver is?
not when I was 11, no.
Is it your testimony in court today that you did not know when you were 11 that you what a revolver was?
When I was 11, I did not know what a revolver was, no.
And on August 18th, 2010, on that morning, you woke up excited, correct?
Yeah, I was excited about something.
That was the gun, wasn't it?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. I don't think so.
You were planning to see that gun later that day, weren't you?
Well, yes, Sydney and I talked about it.
You stated previously that you found out about the Parks gun on August 18th, correct?
Sydney first told me about it the day before. So I did the 17th.
And you had conversations with Sydney about this gun, didn't you?
I mean, a little bit, but she told me about it and how she knew about it and stuff, yeah.
And you had a text message conversation about the gun in question, correct?
On the 18th, yeah.
And you would recognize this conversation when I showed it to you today?
Yeah, I recognize
Permission to approach opposing counsel. Let the record reflect that I am showing opposing counsel. It has been previously marked as plaintiff exhibit 14 for identification purposes. May I push the witness?
You may.
Let the record reflect that I am showing the witness that has been previously marked as plaintiff exhibit 14 for identification purposes. Jesse, this is the text message conversation between yourself and Sydney, correct?
Yeah.
And this is a fair and accurate copy, correct?
Mhm.
I would now like to enter this into evidence as the plaintiff exhibit 14.
Your Honor, at this time, I object to the statements made by Sydney Park in this text conversation as they are hearsay.
What's your response to the statements of Sydney Parks?
Your Honor, as to the statements of Sydney Park, I don't have a response. I would only like to look at the statements of Jesse Duran.
So you're only interested in Jesse Duran's statement?
Yes.
In that case, can we just constructively redact the Sydney Park statements and we just agree not to refer to them?
That would be fine, Your Honor.
Very well sustained. No one should refer to the statements by Sydney Park, only those by Jesse Duran.
Now, I'd like to draw your attention to your response to Sydney. You said that you can't wait to see it, correct?
Mhm.
And by it, you were referring to the gun, correct?
Yeah, Sydney had told me about it the day before.
And you also said that the combo is in for emergencies only, correct?
Yeah, Sydney had told me that her parents keep the code for the safe in this little filing cabinet in their desk on this sort of walls.
So you had an interest and knowledge of how to access this gun, correct?
Well, I mean, I was interested in guns, but
Objection, Your Honor. Assumes facts not in evidence. We haven't heard any facts that show that Jesse Duran could have had access to that gun. We know that's just not in evidence yet, his access to it.
Well, in that case, I think the witness is free to deny, and I also think she's trying to establish foundation that Jesse did actually have access to this, so overruled counsel.
Yes, Your Honor.
Jesse, when you said that the combo, when you knew the location of the combinations of the safe, correct?
yeah, I know exactly. I had never actually seen it, but Sydney told me the day before where it was.
But you had a general idea of where to look, correct?
Because Sydney told me.
Alright, permission to approach the witness and
Right.
to retrieve evidence unless a person under supervision.
Yep.
I would like to ask you a couple of questions about your relationship with your father. You stated on direct that you enjoy playing video games with him, correct?
Yeah, it's one of the main things we like to do together.
And during those video games, your father did make sure to warn you about the dangers of guns, am I right?
Right, he told me like all the time.
And you did understand those warnings.
Yeah,
And you did understand that real guns can kill people.
I did, yeah,
And you did understand that real guns can hurt people.
of course.
And you did understand that real guns can make a serious damage to a person's life, correct?
I know that.
But on August 18th, 2010, you still wanted to look at a real gun, correct?
Oh, Sydney and I both, we talked about guns. She was kind of a tomboy. She liked guns. She played the games with me, and so like we were just both. I just wanted to see it, and my dad never let me hold a real gun before, and I don't think she had either.
Also, on August 18th, 2010, Your dad felt compelled to warn you about the dangers of guns again, correct?
Yeah, he warned me.
And he did this in a text message conversation, correct?
Yeah, he said that to me.
And you would recognize this conversation if I showed it to you in court today, would you?
Yeah.
Permission to approach opposing counsel? Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel has been previously marked as routine for identification purposes.
The record is so recorded.
May I approach the witness?
Granted.
Let the record reflect that I am showing the witness who has been previously marked as plaintiff exhibit 13 for identification purposes. Jesse, this is the conversation between your father and yourself, correct?
Mhm.
And you named your father Voldemort on your contact list, correct?
Yeah, we both like Harry Potter a lot.
So this is a fair and accurate representation.
Mhm.
I would now like to enter this into evidence as plaintiff exhibit 13.
Any objection to plaintiff's 13?
No, Your Honor.
So entered.
This text message was sent on the day of August 18, 2010, correct?
Mhm.
Yes?
Yes, yeah. Sorry.
And your father did tell you, I mean it, Jesse, guns aren't toys and you need to stay away from them, correct?
Mhm. Yes, sorry.
But on that day, you still went into the Parks home to access a real gun, correct?
Yeah, Sydney and I, we both knew that they weren't toys, but we just, we were only 11. It was really stupid.
You ignored your father's warnings, and even though you knew that real guns can kill people, correct?
What?
You ignored your father's warnings, even though you knew that real guns can kill people.
Well, I knew real guns could kill people, and like, I heard him, and I thought that we would try to not hit like, yeah, I guess I didn't like, I should have listened to him more.
Permission to approach witness and retrieve evidence?
Yes.
Permission to approach bench and injury.
Yes.
Now, I would like to bring your attention to the events on August 18, 2010, specifically when you took the gun out of the safe. You mentioned that you punched in the numbers on the safe?
Yeah, Sydney had a code, and she read the numbers out and turned it in.
And after you took the gun out, you loaded the gun, correct?
We both did.
You loaded the gun even though you knew that loading a gun meant that the gun could fire?
Yeah, I don't know why Sydney and I loaded the gun. It was really stupid. I don't know why we did it.
And at this time, you were aware that guns are dangerous, correct?
We both were.
Objection, Your Honor. Repetition. The question has been asked about 6 times, and the witness has answered it every single time with a definitive answer.
I think counsel is allowed to be slightly redundant as this is cross-examination, especially if you haven't heard about how Jesse loaded the gun before, so overruled.
Jesse, after you took the gun out of the safe, you loaded it with Sydney, even though you knew that guns can kill people, correct?
Yeah, we both loaded it, and we both knew that. I don't know why we did it. I mean, we were 11. I regret what we did every day.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. May the witness step down?
Yes, Mr. Duran, you may step down.
And at this time, I ask if Plaintiff's A could be published to the jury.
Plaintiff's A.
The defense A. I apologize.
Plaintiff's A, yes.
Defense, yeah. A. Thank you, Your Honor.
At this time, Your Honor, defense calls Dr. Lola Bashir to the stand.
Very well.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
I am Dr. Lola Bashir.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Bashir?
I am a professor of law at the Arizona Law School in the University of Arizona. I am also the founder and principal of Bashir Strategies.
What does Bashir Strategies do?
Bashir Strategies is a consulting firm which I founded to keep juveniles out of the adult criminal justice system.
What kind of background do you have to work in the adult and juvenile criminal justice system?
I was a staff attorney in the juvenile section at the Denver, Colorado Office of Public Defender.
What kind of educational background do you have to do that?
I received my bachelor's and master's in psychology at the University of Oklahoma, and I had also received my JD from the University of Colorado.
And what is your area of expertise?
Witness recall and false confessions.
You mentioned false confessions. Could you please tell me what false confessions are?
False confessions is a standard for when an admission is made by a confessor to a crime or a criminal act that they did not commit.
I'd like to move forward then and talk about your involvement in today's case.
Of course.
Could you please tell the jury why you're here today?
I was here to analyze the statement that Jesse Duran made on August 18th, 2010 and determine if any of the hallmarks that are often found in false confessions were present or not.
What kind of data did you have at your disposal to do that?
I had access to Hayden Duran's affidavit as well as Officer Dale Williams' affidavit. I also had access to a photograph of the dining room table in which Jesse Duran was placed at the time of writing the statement and diagrams of the park residence.
And what did you do with the data that you had available in this case?
I analyzed it with research and hallmarks that are often found in false confessions.
Now you've mentioned hallmarks twice now. What are these hallmarks?
Hallmarks are red flags, if you will, or characteristics that are often found in false confessions.
And why are these so important in your field?
Let me explain it to you as I explain it to my students at law school. Simply put, say you have a smooth running car. If it doesn't make any noise, you don't get worried, you don't take it to a mechanic. Why? Because nothing is warning you as to something being wrong. That's what it's like when a hallmark is not present. Now, say a noise is being omitted, you do take it to a mechanic because that shows that something is wrong.
Your Honor, this is very confusing for the jury.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
The witness is just clarifying her testimony as to how those hallmarks are important and can be simplified for the jury.
I think the witness is trying to clear this up for the jury, and I think by the time the witness finishes with her answer, it will be a little clearer for the jury, so overruled.
Please continue, Doctor.
All right, let's take the same metaphor which I used before. If that car is making weird noises, seems to be trembling or something while you're riding it, you go take it checked out to a mechanic because that's it warning you that something is wrong. That's what it's like when a hallmark is present.
Now, what do you do once you identify those hallmarks in any kind of a statement?
I weigh the hallmarks that are present against the hallmarks that aren't present and determine the likelihood of a false confession.
And were you able to do that for Jesse's statement?
Absolutely.
Did you have sufficient facts and data to do that?
Of course.
Did you use reliable principles and methods?
Yes.
And were those principles and methods reliably applied to the case?
Yes.
I'd like to move forward then and talk about your conclusions now.
All right.
What can you tell us about Jesse Duran's statement?
Jesse Duran's statement contained hallmarks as well as had hallmarks that were missing.
Well, let's talk about the hallmarks that were missing from Jesse's statement first. Tell us what they were.
There was no lengthy interrogation. There was also no signs of intellectual or cognitive disabilities on part of Jesse Duran. There's absolutely no possibility of mistaken identification. And there's also no signs of aggressive police tactics from Officer Dale Williams specifically.
I'd like to talk about the hallmarks that you did find in Jesse's statement then. Would you be able to describe those for us here in court today?
Yes.
Permission for the witness to step down and you make use of a visual aid, Your Honor?
Yes, granted. Counsel's also free to move to use visual aid.
I mean, Your Honor.
Absolutely.
Dr. Bashir, you can rearrange them as you want. Now, what was one of the most obvious hallmarks you found in Jesse's statement?
The first and most obvious hallmark or red flag that I found on Jesse Duran's case was that he had just suffered severe trauma. He had witnessed his best friend die and was still in the home in which this event took place. In fact, he was in a room adjacent to the room in which this event occurred and could see CSI agents walking in and out.
Was there anything else besides trauma that affected Jesse's statement?
Yes. Any conclusion that I came